Okay, let's dive in. We're tackling something really fundamental today, a question that seems simple, maybe. How do we actually accept ourselves? Truly.
Yeah, it sounds straightforward, but the perspectives we've looked at suggest it's a real journey, a kind of path of return, as they put it.
A path back from something.
Exactly. Back from this place, many of us sort of naturally fall into a state of self-rejection towards acceptance.
And there's this core tension, isn't there? The idea being that deep down, fundamentally, you were already accepted, like unconditionally.
Right. But then there's the reality of how we feel, that often persistent nagging feeling of being, I don't know, unaccepted or not quite right.
That disconnect, that's what we're exploring in this deep dive, isn't it? Why does that gap exist? And according to these sources, how can we bridge it?
Uh-huh. Our mission here is really to unpack those layers of self-rejection and see what this material suggests as the path towards, genuine self-acceptance,
Yeah.
mapping out that inner landscape.
Okay, so where does this path actually start? What's the first step or the foundational idea?
Well, it begins with a pretty bold statement, really. The fundamental truth, according to this view, is that at your very core, you're already accepted, period.
Not something you have to earn, not based on how good you are or if you mess up.
No, not at all. That's the key. This acceptance is described as unconditional. It just is. It comes with being alive, essentially,
Hmm.
from just being.
No conditions attached to your right to exist or be okay.
None whatsoever. It's presented as inherent, a given.
Okay, right. So if that's the baseline reality, why do so many of us walk around feeling, well, unaccepted? Where does that feeling come from?
Ah, yeah. This is where it gets a bit more complex. Because despite that original inherent acceptance, these sources explain how this tendency towards self-rejection develops over life.
And it's not usually something we consciously choose, right? It's not like deciding, I think I'll reject myself today,
Definitely not. It's often described as unconscious. It becomes this sort of inner conditioning.
like a background program running.
Exactly. Kind of shaping how you see yourself, how you react, often without you even realizing it fully.
And we see the fingerprints of this everywhere, don't we? The sources give some very common examples.
Absolutely. Things like shame, that drive for perfectionism, feeling guilty or afraid or stuck in regret. These aren't just random feelings. They're seen as expressions of that underlying conditioning of self-rejection.
And the idea is every time we believe that inner critic, that voice saying, I'm not enough or I shouldn't have done that.
Every time you buy into it, you're essentially closing yourself off, excluding yourself from the acceptance that's actually fundamentally always available, always there.
Which sounds like it would create some serious internal friction, a conflict.
It really does. You've got this deep truth. You are
Uh,
accepted, clashing with this ingrained feeling or belief, I don't feel accepted. The sources describe it quite vividly. The assertion of being unaccepted tries to fight against the truth of being accepted. That feeling tries to take over, to replace the truth.
like an internal argument. Or denial, maybe.
Denial is definitely part of it. That feeling of not being acceptable can obscure the truth, yeah? But the perspective here is clear. Denying the truth doesn't make it go away. It just covers it up.
And that tension, that kind of internal grinding feeling, is that what they link to cognitive dissonance?
Precisely.
Yeah.
That's the term used. The discomfort you feel when you hold these two conflicting things inside. I am accepted versus I feel unaccepted. That clash creates stress, emotional tension, suffering, basically.
Okay, so you're suffering because of this conflict, because you feel unaccepted even though the truth is you are. Now, what do we usually do with that suffering? What's the typical reaction?
This is a really crucial turn, according to the sources. Instead of just being with that suffering gently, we tend to have this almost automatic reaction to reject the suffering itself.
Which, I mean, makes sense on the surface, right? Who wants to feel pain?
Logically, yeah. It seems like the right move. Push away the bad feeling. But the insight here is that this act, rejecting the suffering, actually pushes us further away from that original truth of acceptance. It adds another layer.
Ah, and this leads to that concept they call double rejection. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, it's like a two-step process of moving away.
Mm-hmm.
First, you reject parts of yourself, you judge yourself, think you're flawed, not good enough. That's the initial self-rejection.
And that creates pain, the suffering we just talked about.
Right. And then the second rejection is you reject the pain that the first rejection caused. You suffer from feeling unacceptable, and then you push away the suffering itself.
Wow. So rejecting who you are and rejecting the feeling that comes from rejecting who you are, that sounds exhausting.
It is. And the result, according to this viewpoint, is that this double rejection creates even more distance from that core truth that you are already loved, already accepted, just as you are. It's like building thicker walls.
And where does this cycle often lead people in practical terms?
It often fuels what gets called the self-improvement hamster wheel.
Oh, yeah, I know that wheel. The constant trying, fixing, striving, feeling like you always need to become better to finally be okay, to finally be acceptable.
Exactly that. And the sources point out the deep irony here. You're working so hard to make yourself acceptable, driven by the belief you aren't, while the underlying truth is that you already are.
So the striving itself is based on a false premise.
According to this view, yes. And then the material starts talking about how you might actually step off that hamster wheel.
Okay, so if striving harder, trying to become acceptable isn't the answer, what's the alternative path these sources suggest?
Well, it's presented not as some huge dramatic act of surrender or instantly achieving perfect self-love. It's much more about taking small, courageous moments of acceptance.
Small moments. That sounds potentially doable. What kind of examples do they give? They sound quite specific.
They are, and they feel quite radical because they go against that rejection instinct. For instance, one example is literally saying, I accept that I am currently blaming others for my suffering.
Accepting the blaming, not trying to stop it.
Just accepting that it's happening right now. Another example is even more direct. I accept that I cannot yet accept myself.
Whoa. Accepting that you can accept, that feels paradoxical, like giving up almost.
That's precisely why it's framed as radical. It cuts against the grain of striving. Or another one, I see the part of me that can be quite loveless, and yet I love myself and accept myself as I am, acknowledging the unacceptable part within acceptance.
So why are these tiny, almost counterintuitive steps, like accepting your own non-acceptance or accepting that you blame others, why are they seen as so powerful?
Because the idea is, in that moment, you are no longer excluding your non-acceptance. You stop fighting the part of you that feels rejected, or the part that resists, or even the part that feels incapable of acceptance itself.
You're bringing the thing you were trying to get rid of into the acceptance.
Exactly. You're intentionally including the resistance, the inability, the flaw within the space of acceptance.
So the simple act of accepting your lack of acceptance, that's the key that turns the lock.
That's the perspective, yes. That act itself is what starts to reopen the door to that original state, to that inherent okayness, that love. It isn't about becoming perfectly loving first. It's about including all of it, even the messy bits, in your awareness with acceptance.
Which brings us to the conclusion offered in this material. It fundamentally shifts the goal away from self-improvement as the path back.
Right. The core insight is that you don't return to being accepted by fixing yourself or reaching some perfect standard. You return by receiving everything, even the part of you that is terrified of acceptance, the part that is non-acceptance with acceptance.
So acceptance isn't the final destination, not the happily ever after state.
No, the sources are really clear on this. Acceptance isn't the end point. It's described more as a gateway
A gateway to what?
to presence, to peace, to truth. These are seen as the things that naturally arise after acceptance, or maybe through acceptance. They follow when acceptance is allowed.
Okay, so just to recap this deep dive, we've gone from this baseline idea of inherent acceptance through how self-rejection develops, creating that internal conflict, that cognitive dissonance leading to suffering, and then that tricky double rejection.
Getting further away.
But the path back, counterintuitively perhaps, isn't about fighting harder or becoming perfect. It's about these radical, small acts of accepting even the non-acceptance.
Exactly. Shifting from trying to earn acceptance to recognizing it's already here, and the way back involves opening to all parts of your experience.
It really reframes acceptance, doesn't it? Not as achieving some perfect state, but as opening a door right here, right now, letting presence, peace, and truth emerge from that.
That's the essence of it.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. If the path back involves accepting even the part of you that feels it can't accept, what does that tell you about what self-acceptance truly is? What might shift if you stopped aiming for some future, perfected, fully accepted version of yourself and instead practice embracing acceptance right where you are, non-acceptance and all? Something to really sit with.